Welcome to Infidelity Truths. Before we dive into today's gripping story, please take a second to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us create more thrilling stories just for you. Let's begin.
The morning had started like every other one for the past 5 years of marriage. David was making coffee while watching Margaret get ready through the kitchen window, her blonde hair caught in the golden light filtering through the curtains. She'd always been meticulous about her appearance, but lately there was something different, an excessive care, and attention to detail that hadn't been there before. "Honey?" Her voice sounded too melodic, almost musical. "I'm going out with the girls tonight. It'll be one of those long nights. You know how it is. I'll probably get home late." David paused, the mug suspended in midair. Margaret always went out with her friends. It was a sacred Friday ritual he respected and even encouraged. But there was something in the cadence of her voice, in the way she avoided his eyes while speaking, in the exaggerated sweetness that didn't feel natural. It was as if she were playing a part, acting out the role of the perfect wife, asking permission for an innocent night out. "Sure," he replied. His own voice sounded oddly distant. "Have fun." The smile she gave him was too radiant, like a spotlight shining straight into his eyes. She kissed his cheek quickly and disappeared upstairs, leaving behind a trail of expensive perfume. Not the one she usually wore, but something new, more sensual, more intense. David stood in the kitchen, a growing unease building in his chest like a distant storm. His instincts, honed by years of being together, whispered warnings his rational mind tried to suppress. There were signs he'd been ignoring. The late-night calls she took in the garden, the phone always placed face down, the physical distance she justified with work exhaustion. The sound of running water upstairs brought him back to the present. Margaret was in the shower, getting ready for her night out with the girls. David looked at the kitchen table where she'd left her brown leather handbag, the same one she'd carried for 3 years with worn straps and lipstick stains on the inner lining. He'd never violated her privacy before. In 5 years of marriage, he'd never gone through her personal things, never questioned her activities or demanded explanations. Trust had always been the foundation of their relationship, the pillar on which they'd built their life together. But at that moment, something stronger than reason compelled him to act. Hesitantly, he approached the bag. His hand trembled slightly as he lifted it from the table, officially to wipe the surface clean in case anyone asked. But when he picked it up, something inside shifted, a small object sliding into a corner. Curious and already gripped by a dark premonition, David opened the bag. Among the usual items, wallet, keys, makeup, mints, was a small rectangular box hidden beneath her leather wallet. His fingers found it almost instinctively, as if it radiated a specific magnetic energy. The box was discreet, with no markings, but David recognized it immediately. With his heart pounding erratically, he opened it slowly. Inside, untouched and still in its original packaging, was a pack of condoms. The expensive kind, flavored, completely different from the ones they used to use back when they still used them years ago before Margaret suggested they stop because they knew each other so well. Time stopped. The sound of water upstairs became distant, muffled, as if he were underwater. All the puzzle pieces he'd been ignoring snapped into place, forming a crystal clear and devastating picture. The growing distance, the elaborate excuses, the phone guarded like a state secret, those extra shifts at work that never resulted in extra pay. David closed his eyes and took a deep breath. He expected to feel anger, a burning fury that would consume him and drive him upstairs to break down the bathroom door and confront her with evidence in hand. He expected the urge to shout, to demand explanations, to smash something in frustration. But what came instead was different. A strange calm settled over him, as if a decision had already been made in some quiet corner of his mind. There were no more questions to ask, no more doubts to clear up. The truth was right there, small and undeniable, in the palm of his hand. Instead of exploding, David walked into the living room and opened the drawer of the coffee table where they kept old photos. His fingers found the one he was looking for almost automatically. A wedding photo taken the exact moment they walked out of the church. They were glowing, wrapped in each other's arms with genuine smiles of two people who believed in forever. Margaret wore flowers in her hair and held her dress with one hand while the other rested on his chest. He looked at her as if she were the only person in the world. With surprisingly steady hands, David placed the photograph inside the condom box right on top of the sealed package. The image of the past contrasted cruelly with the present reality, a visual reminder of broken promises and betrayed trust. He closed the box carefully and returned it to the exact spot where he'd found it, hidden beneath her wallet in Margaret's handbag. The shower ended. David heard her footsteps upstairs, the sound of the hairdryer, the opening and closing of drawers. He sat in the armchair in the living room and waited, as if watching a movie whose ending he already knew. Margaret came downstairs an hour later, transformed. She'd chosen a dress David didn't recognize, something new, form-fitting, that accentuated her curves in a way her usual girls' night out dresses never did. Her makeup was flawless, more elaborate than usual, and the new perfume created an almost tangible aura around her. "Don't wait up," she said, kissing his cheek with lips that tasted of expensive gloss. "You know how these nights go. We lose track of time." David nodded silently, watching her pick up her bag and quickly check its contents, not noticing that something had changed. The door closed behind her with a definitive sound, like the starting gun of a race he hadn't realized he was about to run. He remained in the armchair, immersed in a quiet that wasn't peace, but neither was it despair. It was something in between, a melancholy acceptance that chapters end even when we don't want them to. David didn't turn on the TV, didn't pick up a book, didn't try to distract himself. He simply existed in that space between before and after, processing the end of an era. The day passed in slow motion. David made dinner for one, ate mechanically, washed the dishes with automatic movements. The house, once a home, now felt like an abandoned set after the end of a play. Every object carried memories that seemed to belong to other people, younger, more naive versions of themselves. Around midnight, he went upstairs to the bedroom and lay down on his side of the bed. Margaret's side remained neat and untouched, as if she hadn't slept there in weeks, which, upon reflection, might have been true. How many of those girls' nights out had actually been what she claimed? David couldn't sleep. He lay in the dark, listening to the neighborhood's nighttime sounds. Cars passing, a distant dog barking, the wind in the garden trees. His mind didn't race in anxious circles as he'd expected. Instead, it was strangely clear, as if finding the box had lifted a fog he hadn't known was there. At 3:40 a.m., he heard the key in the door. Margaret's footsteps were different, more hesitant, less confident. She climbed the stairs slowly, pausing in the hallway as if deciding something. David heard the bathroom door close, followed by a prolonged silence that lasted far longer than a normal nighttime routine would take. When Margaret finally entered the bedroom, David pretended to sleep. She moved like a ghost, sliding under the covers without making a sound. But he could feel the tension radiating from her body, hear her uneven breathing, practically taste the fear in her mouth. She didn't sleep. David knew because he didn't sleep either, and he could feel every restless movement, every muffled sigh, every failed attempt to find a comfortable position. They lay side by side, separated by mere inches physically, but light years emotionally, each pretending the other wasn't awake. Morning arrived with a gray, dull light. David got up first, as he always did, and went downstairs to make coffee. Margaret appeared 20 minutes later, and the transformation was shocking. Her eyes were red and puffy, with dark circles that makeup couldn't fully hide. She avoided his gaze as if he were the sun, impossible to look at directly. "Good morning," he said simply, pouring coffee into 2 mugs. Good morning," she replied, her voice hoarse and low. David placed the mug in front of her and sat down across the table. Margaret stared fixedly at the dark liquid as if she could find answers at the bottom of the cup. "Margaret," he said, his voice calm but firm, "I want a divorce." The words hung in the air between them like physical objects. Margaret looked up for the first time, and David saw desperation in her eyes that almost made him back down. Almost. "David, she began, but the words broke into sobs. "It's not what you think. The box, it wasn't mine. It was Jennifer's. She asked me to hold on to it because her husband, you know how jealous he is." David watched his wife drown in hastily made-up lies, each excuse more desperate than the last. It was painful to see someone he'd loved disintegrate like this. "We can go to therapy," she continued, tears streaming freely down her face. "We can fix this. It was a mistake, David, a moment of weakness. It doesn't mean anything." He finished his coffee in silence, placed the empty mug in the sink, and turned to her one last time. "I'll talk to a lawyer today," he said. "You can stay in the house until we sort out the details." David grabbed his keys and left, leaving Margaret crying in the kitchen where so many happy mornings had begun. The following days unfolded like a choreographed dance. Lawyers were contacted, papers were prepared, assets were cataloged. David moved into a small but clean apartment in the city center, a place that carried no memories of a past that now seemed to belong to someone else. Margaret alternated between attempts at reconciliation and outbursts of anger. She showed up at his office, called incessantly, sent long, incoherent messages, mixing apologies with accusations. David responded to everything with a professional courtesy that hurt her more than any outright cruelty could have. 3 weeks after the breakfast that changed everything, Margaret appeared at his apartment door. She looked different, more fragile, paler, with a vulnerability that hadn't existed before. "David, we need to talk," she said, her voice trembling.
"I'm pregnant." He looked at her for a long moment, processing the words. "Congratulations," he finally replied. "But that doesn't change anything between us." "The baby is yours," she said quickly, the words tripping over each other. "It's our child, David, our family." "No," he answered with a certainty that surprised him. "It's not." Margaret started crying again, that desperate sobbing that had become her signature in recent weeks. "How can you say that? How can you be so sure?" David didn't answer. There was no need. They both knew the truth, even if only one was willing to admit it. "We'll do a DNA test," he finally said. "If the child is mine, I'll take responsibility, but that won't change our situation." The test was done 3 weeks later, through a non-invasive procedure that analyzed fetal DNA in Margaret's blood. David waited for the results with the same strange calm he'd felt since the night he found the box. There was no nervousness, no secret hope for reconciliation, just the need to close the chapter completely. The results arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by a clinical lab in a sealed envelope. David opened it in the presence of Margaret's lawyer, who had insisted on witnessing the moment. "Probability of paternity, 0%, the lawyer read aloud. Margaret collapsed into the chair as if she'd taken a physical blow. David signed the final divorce papers 3 days later. 6 months had passed since that morning in the kitchen. David had built a new routine, discovered new hobbies, made new friends. His life was smaller now, simpler, but also more honest. He didn't feel anger toward Margaret. That emotion had evaporated like morning mist. What remained was something close to pity, mixed with a strange gratitude that she'd been discovered before they wasted more years on an illusion. Sometimes, walking through the city, David thought about the photograph he'd left in the condom box. He wondered if Margaret still had it, if she looked at it occasionally and remembered when they were happy, or at least thought they were. He hoped she did. Everyone deserves to remember the good times, even when they choose to destroy them. The divorce was finalized on a rainy autumn morning. David signed the last documents at a polished wooden table in a lawyer's office that smelled of old leather and strong coffee. There was no drama, no final confrontations, just signatures on letterhead, a mutually agreed division of assets, and the official end of a chapter. Walking back to his apartment, David realized he felt neither relief nor sadness. He felt something more subtle, a kind of completeness, as if a story that had begun years ago had finally found its natural conclusion. The rain stopped when he got home, and a ray of sunlight broke through the clouds, illuminating the wet streets with a golden light that made everything seem new and possible. David smiled, the first genuine smile in months, and walked up the stairs to his apartment, carrying only his keys and the certainty that some endings, no matter how painful, are also disguised new beginnings.